Welcome to part 6 of endocrine. The first question I throw out at you here is, how do different hormones interact in the blood? So we know what one does on its own and what another one does on its own, but what happens when both of those hormones are circulating? Do they interact? What do they do to each other? Anything? So let's look. This is a really nice graph showing the combined effects of a few hormones here. So take a look at it. We have one down at the bottom, cortisol, which was the stress hormone. I have a very sensitive mouse. The second one is glucagon. And what happens when you release glucagon is that blood sugar goes up a little bit, and then it sort of levels off over time in hours. And cortisol also is raising blood sugar so that you can react to that stress. Epinephrine does the same thing. So there's going to be a rise in blood sugar. You're now more ready. This is adrenaline. Epinephrine is adrenaline. You're more ready to run from the monster, that's the bear that came out of the woods. And then slowly it'll release down again. So they have different effects, different releases of blood glucose will go up at different levels. However, if you combine the effects, now you have both glucagon and epinephrine. The jump here is way bigger than just the addition of these two. So it's a big jump. And then what happens if you were to put all three together? You would have this skyrocketing level of blood glucose here, way up here, once those three are together. So we're calling this synergism because they actually enhance each other. The mechanism we don't understand. We don't know how this works very well. But this is true of different drugs. That's why in pharmacology you have to be so careful of what different chemicals can be taken at the same time, because they may have combined effects and surpass the individual effect of each one on their own. Other hormones may be permissive. A permissive hormone is one that must be present in order for the other one to function at all. If it's going to work, it needs first to have the other one present. An example of this is thyroid hormone. It must be present in order for the reproductive system to mature. And there we have the estrogens and testosterones, but they're not going to function if that thyroid hormone isn't present. So that would be permissive, needs to be present. Some hormones may be antagonistic, and these oppose each other. And this example we've seen before. It is of insulin and glucagon. Remember, both released from the pancreas. One of them is going to elevate blood sugar, and the other one, insulin, is going to lower blood glucose. In the event of having just had a meal, you release insulin and you will move some of that glucose into the cells. The other way around, skip a meal, release glucagon. That will affect the liver, and the liver will release glucose so that you can bring this back to homeostasis. So those two fight each other. They are antagonistic. What comes next in this chapter is looking at some endocrine glands and what they release. So let's see if from anatomy you remember what these are. Where's the thymus? Where's the pineal gland? Where's the pituitary gland? Do you remember these? Thymus is just above the heart. Pineal gland's in the brain, midbrain. So is the pituitary. And the adrenal gland above the kidneys. So it's good for you to review the location of the glands. And we're going to go through what different hormones are released. But this is a good review from anatomy. It should be a review from anatomy. We'll start out with the pituitary gland. It's also called the neurohypophysis. It's divided into two lobes. So in the midbrain here, is where the pituitary gland is. It sits inside bone, and it's protected that way. And that location there is the sella turcica, if you remember from anatomy. This is divided into two lobes, anterior and posterior, and they secrete very different hormones. They're sort of like two different glands. So the anterior pituitary is a true endocrine gland. It's going to have all these cells that are secreting. The posterior pituitary is really actually an extension here of the hypothalamus. And those hormones are manufactured elsewhere here in the hypothalamus in the neurons, and they're going to be delivered to the posterior pituitary, but they're not manufactured like they are in the anterior pituitary. So two peptide hormones are secreted by the posterior pituitary. The first one is antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, also called vasopressin, and it acts on the kidneys to retain water. We are terrestrial organisms. We dehydrate easily. So it's very important to have a hormone that's going to not let you dehydrate. It's going to hold on to water as best it can. So don't think of this water retention as a negative thing. It's a very positive thing. It's being able to not dehydrate. The second one is oxytocin. And oxytocin is responsible for milk ejection during breastfeeding. It's also responsible for uterine contractions during labor and delivery. That's what's going to increase the increased levels of oxytocin, increase contractions, that increase oxytocin, that increase contractions until finally the baby is born. Oxytocin also has a really important role in maternal behavior, in making a mother calm and stay with her child, in sexual and social behavior. And there is some idea that maybe autism comes from an imbalance in that oxytocin, but that's not settled yet. So very important hormones. Two hormones from the anterior pituitary also have an inhibiting hormone, and that's growth hormone and prolactin. 6 hormones are produced and released by the anterior pituitary. Okay, now we're talking about the anterior, and the first one of those is growth hormone, or GH. It's a peptide. You release this throughout your life, even though you've stopped growing. As a child, of course, you have more. The peak secretion is in your teen years when you have those growth spurts that you can't eat enough to keep growing. And interestingly enough, in adults, there's a large pulse of it is released in the first 2 hours of your sleep. And this is not well understood either. But that's when you're, as an adult, releasing growth hormone. The pathway of growth hormone is such that there is, in the hypothalamus, a stimulating hormone, which is a regulatory hormone, that's going to stimulate the manufacture and release of the growth hormone. At the same time, it has an inhibitor also in the hypothalamus called somatostatin, which kind of keeps it in check. So you can either stop the release of more GH or stimulate release of more GH. And this is coming from the boss. I call the hypothalamus the boss. And that's going to stimulate then the anterior pituitary to release or not to release growth hormone. Then what happens? Well, once it's released, it'll stimulate the liver and other tissues to release something that we call insulin-like growth factors. So those growth factors are going to be responsible for cartilage growth, increase in blood glucose. Blood glucose is going to distribute to this tissue so that they may grow, and the other tissues that are growing fast are bone and tissue. All those are going to be affected by these insulin-like growth factors that are released by the liver under the influence of GH, or growth hormone. A little more on what those insulin-like growth factors do. They promote protein synthesis. If you can make more proteins and increase that tissue, you're going to enlarge that tissue. So the proteins are going to promote tissue growth, bone growth, cartilage growth, and increase in that plasma glucose to allow for all this growth. How do they do this? They break down fat and they break down glycogen from the liver. So you've stored that, and for when it's needed at different times. Now, those insulin-like growth factors are going to go to that stored fat and that glycogen, break it down and release it in order to stimulate growth. What if growth hormone is deficient in adults? Well, then there's a disruption in the ratio of body fat to lean mass. So there's weight gain of the individual when this is missing. Decrease in energy is sluggishness, decrease in motivation, in just energy and motivation. If it's very accelerated, there may be cognitive abnormalities. And then low bone density if there's no bone growth, and diminished muscle mass if there's no muscle growth. What if it's excessive? It's excessive GH. It results in acromegaly. This could result from a tumor in the pituitary. You have overgrowth of bone and cartilage. So you saw those facial features, the heavy jaw, the enlarged nasal bone you see in this picture here in A. And leading to arthritis, fatigue, weakness, sometimes impaired vision, less common, but yes, also present. Sometimes growth levels are aberrant in children. This is Fezzik from The Princess Bride, if you ever saw that movie. And if they have severe excess, they have gigantism, like Fezzik. And if they have a severe deficiency, then this could result in dwarfism. So very important. Let's stop there. We will continue on these hormones from the posterior pituitary, from the anterior pituitary.